The studio lights burned bright over the debate stage, catching the sheen of nervous sweat on Minnesota Governor Tim Walz's forehead. Across from him, former President Donald J. Trump leaned back in his chair, wearing that unmistakable smirk, the kind that usually appeared right before he verbally eviscerated someone. It was supposed to be a town hall for unity, hosted by a major news network. But as soon as Walz started talking, everyone in the audience knew unity was the last thing that was going to happen tonight. Mr. Trump, Walz said, his tone sharp, you've built your career on the illusion of success. Casinos, airlines, fake universities, every one of your so-called business ventures has ended in disaster. You are, quite frankly, an abject failure at business. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Trump tilted his head, eyes narrowing slightly, but he didn't interrupt. He simply adjusted his tie, letting the words hang in the air, savoring the tension like a showman waiting for his cue. Walz, sensing momentum, pressed on. You've conned hard-working Americans into believing you're a genius, but all you've done is declare bankruptcy 6 times and sell your name to the highest bidder. You talk about making America great, but you couldn't even make a single company profitable without running it into the ground. Some in the crowd applauded, mostly younger voters and a few journalists who looked eager to capture Trump's reaction. But Trump stayed silent. For him, silence was never weakness. It was preparation. Finally, after a long pause, he leaned forward and spoke softly, almost too calmly. Tim, you done? The governor, slightly thrown off by the quiet tone, nodded. Trump smiled. Good. Because I was worried you might actually start believing your own little speech there. The crowd chuckled nervously. Let me tell you something, Tim, Trump continued, his voice now rising with that familiar Queen's bravado. When you've built skyscrapers in Manhattan, run billion-dollar companies, and turned your name into one of the most valuable brands on earth, then you can talk to me about business. Until then, you're just another politician reading from a script written by some intern who's probably more successful than you. The laughter was immediate and explosive. Even some of the moderators failed to hide their smiles. But Trump wasn't done. He stood up from his chair, breaking the debate protocol, and walked toward the edge of the stage. You talk about my bankruptcies, but you forget to mention something, Tim. I came back. Every single time. I rebuilt. I created jobs. I built towers. You built higher taxes and lower morale. Walz tried to interject, but Trump cut him off with a finger point and a sharp glare. Don't interrupt me, Timmy. You had your little speech. Now it's my turn. The audience roared again, some in shock, others in amusement. Trump turned to the crowd. You know, folks, these politicians love to call me a failure. But look where I am, and look where they are. I've got real people, millions of them, who built their families, their homes, their retirements because of the American economy we created. Under Trump, America was winning. Under Walz, you can't even keep grocery prices down in Minnesota. The camera zoomed in on Walz, whose expression had shifted from confident to flustered. Trump smirked again. You want to talk failure, Governor? Let's talk about the homeless camps outside Minneapolis. Let's talk about crime, carjackings, businesses leaving your state because your policies are so bad even your own voters are moving to Texas. You call me a failure, but at least I didn't fail my own citizens. The audience erupted into a mix of cheers and boos, but it was clear, Trump had seized the energy. Walz tried to recover. That's rich, coming from a man who. But Trump raised his hand. Coming from a man who built an empire, became president, and made you all talk about him every single day for 8 years. Yeah, that's pretty rich. Even the moderators couldn't regain control. The crowd had turned into an arena. Trump basked in the noise like a performer at his peak. Then, with a sly grin, he delivered the finishing blow. You said I was an abject failure at business, Trump said, pacing slowly. Yet here you are, standing on my network stage, begging for relevance, using my name to get airtime. You don't attack me because you think I'm a failure, Tim, you attack me because you wish you could do what I've done. There was a long silence before the crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Walz's face reddened as he shuffled his notes, visibly shaken. The moderators hurriedly called for a break, hoping to cool the temperature of the room. As the lights dimmed, Trump turned slightly toward Walz and whispered, loud enough for nearby microphones to catch. Next time you come for Trump, bring a calculator, and maybe a reality check. The clip went viral within minutes. By the end of the night, #Abject failure was trending on social media, not because of Tim Walz's speech, but because of Trump's brutal takedown. And somewhere in a quiet dressing room, Walz sat staring at his reflection, realizing that in trying to humiliate Trump, he had only given him another victory. The morning after the debate, every major news outlet in America had the same headline splashed across their screens. Trump destroys Tim Walz on live TV. Clips from the showdown flooded social media. On TikTok, the moment Trump said, "Bring a calculator, and maybe a reality check," had already been remixed into hundreds of videos. On X, formerly Twitter, memes of a sweating Tim Walz facing a smug Trump trended for hours. The #Abject failure was supposed to mock Trump, but instead, it had turned into a punchline against Walz himself. CNN tried to soften the blow, running a headline that read, "Walz calls out Trump's business record, sparks debate." But even their analysts admitted privately that the governor had walked straight into Trump's trap. By mid-morning, Trump was already on Truth Social, typing in all caps, "Greater than, Tim Walz, the governor WHO failed Minnesota, tried to lecture me about success. Sad. Business is about comebacks, something he'll never understand." Within minutes, it had over 1 million likes. Meanwhile, Tim Walz sat in his campaign office, staring at the muted TV replaying the very moment he'd lost control of the debate. His advisors shuffled nervously around him, trying to figure out how to spin the disaster. "Governor," one of them began carefully, "we can shift focus. Say it was about character, not about business. Make it a moral argument." Walz sighed. "It won't matter." He turned it into theater. Again, he wasn't wrong. Trump's genius had always been performance, transforming every insult into energy, every attack into applause. At noon, Trump appeared outside his Mar-a-Lago estate, surrounded by cameras. He looked cheerful, almost glowing, as he faced reporters. "Did you see that debate last night?" he said with a grin. "It was beautiful. The ratings are through the roof. They said it was the most watched political debate this year, and we know why. People love a winner." A journalist shouted, "Mr. Trump, Walz said your businesses have failed multiple times. Do you have a response?" Trump's eyes twinkled. "Of course. You know who else failed? Walt Disney, Henry Ford, Steve Jobs. The great ones all stumble, but they come back stronger. You fall, you rise. That's what success is." Tim Walz wouldn't understand, he's never built anything but excuses. Laughter broke out among his supporters standing nearby. Back in Minnesota, the governor's staff tried to salvage the situation. They arranged interviews on friendly networks, hoping to paint Trump as a bully. But every time Walz spoke, the clips were drowned out by Trump's viral soundbites. On Fox News, a commentator summed it up bluntly. Walz came in with facts, Trump came in with fire, and in politics, fire wins. By the next evening, the polls reflected the fallout. Trump's approval rating among independents had jumped 5 points overnight. Donations to his campaign surged. Meanwhile, Walz's staff quietly canceled his upcoming media appearances, citing schedule conflicts. Inside the White House correspondents' circles, people were already whispering, Walz just made Trump relevant again. 2 days later, Trump held a rally in Iowa. It was classic Trump, roaring crowds, red hats, music blasting. He walked on stage and immediately brought up the debate. "Did anyone see that governor from Minnesota?" he boomed. "He called me a failure," then failed to finish his own sentence. The crowd erupted with laughter and chants of, "Trump! Trump! Trump!" Then Trump did something unexpected. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This," he said, "is the profit sheet from Trump International Hotel in D.C., one of the most successful luxury properties in the country before Biden came in and ruined everything. You know what that looks like to me, folks." He held the paper high. "Success. That's what winning looks like." The cameras zoomed in on the paper, capturing the gold-embossed logo. The image went viral again within minutes. Walz's team tried one last push. They released an ad accusing Trump of bragging while working families suffer. But even that backfired. Commenters mocked the ad's tone, calling it desperate and flat. By the weekend, Trump was everywhere again, dominating news cycles, late-night shows, podcasts, and memes. Even those who disliked him couldn't stop talking about him. And that, as always, was his secret weapon. Days later, during a radio interview, a host asked Walz, "Governor, do you regret the debate comments?" Walz hesitated for a long moment. Finally, he said quietly, "I regret underestimating how fast he can turn a room." The host smiled. "That's Trump for you." In a private email leaked weeks later, one of Walz's senior advisors wrote, "We tried to out-logic a showman. But politics isn't logic anymore, it's theater, and Trump owns the stage." As Trump prepared for his next campaign stop, he made one last post that summed it all up.